The last Christmas letter wasn't in the mailbox. It wasn't even finished. I found it 3 days after my wife Eleanor's funeral, tucked beneath 47 neatly addressed Christmas envelopes that had all been mailed exactly when they should have been. Every envelope carried a faded postmark except the last one. Across the front, in Eleanor's familiar handwriting, was the name Rachel Monroe, a woman I'd never heard mentioned in our 52 years of marriage. Inside, the letter ended halfway through a sentence, as if Eleanor had simply laid down her pen and walked away forever. I stared at those unfinished words, wondering which hurt more, that my wife had kept a secret for nearly half a century, or that she had trusted me enough to leave it unfinished. If you've ever wondered whether love can outlive unanswered questions, stay with me for a little while. I wish someone had asked me that before Christmas found me sitting alone at our kitchen table. The house had never sounded so empty. Eleanor used to hum Christmas hymns while she baked gingerbread every December. Even when arthritis stiffened her hands, she insisted on rolling the dough herself because she said cookies made by machines never tasted like family. Now the cookie tins were still stacked above the refrigerator, untouched, while her favorite red apron remained hanging behind the pantry door exactly where she'd left it. I wasn't the kind of man who believed objects carried ghosts. Still, every room carried Eleanor. After 30 years as an Air Force crew chief, I trusted maintenance schedules, documentation, and checklists more than emotions. Aircraft didn't hide surprises if people followed procedures. Families, I was beginning to realize, operated very differently. Our granddaughter Emily had spent the afternoon helping me sort Christmas decorations I couldn't bear to unpack alone. She found the cedar box while searching for the tree lights. "I think Grandma wanted you to have this." Inside rested the letters. 48 envelopes. Every one addressed in Eleanor's graceful handwriting. Every one carefully dated for Christmas. The oldest envelope reached back almost 5 decades, long before Emily had been born, long before we became grandparents, even before I retired from the Air Force. At first, I assumed they were copies of family Christmas cards. Then I noticed something strange. None were addressed to relatives. Every single envelope carried the same family name: Monroe. Emily watched quietly while I arranged them across the dining room table in perfect chronological order without even realizing I was doing it. Old military habits never truly disappear. "They're beautiful," she whispered. "They're also something your grandmother never told me about." The final envelope rested apart from the others. No stamp, no postmark, no sealed flap. Only Rachel Monroe's name written carefully across the front. When I unfolded the unfinished pages inside, Eleanor's handwriting looked slightly different. The graceful curves pressed deeper into the paper, as though writing had become physically difficult. "Dear Rachel," it began. "If you're reading this, then another Christmas has arrived, and there is something your grandmother wanted you to know before." The sentence stopped. No signature. No explanation. Nothing. Only a single pressed holly leaf slipped silently from between the pages and landed beside my wedding ring. I had absolutely no idea why Eleanor had left it there, or why, after faithfully writing one Christmas letter every year for 48 years, she had chosen never to mail the last one. The next morning, I carried the unfinished letter back to the kitchen as if it were something fragile enough to crack beneath ordinary daylight. Eleanor had always believed Christmas deserved slow mornings. She never rushed coffee, never hurried decorating the tree, and certainly never hurried writing those mysterious letters. Looking across the table, I realized 48 Christmases had quietly passed while she had been keeping a tradition I had somehow never noticed. That troubled me more than the unfinished sentence. Emily returned just after breakfast, carrying cinnamon rolls from the bakery Eleanor loved. She set the white box on the counter before noticing the envelopes spread neatly across the table exactly where we'd left them. "You've been awake all night, haven't you?" "I've been thinking." "About Rachel?" I nodded. "About your grandmother?" Emily sat beside me without touching the letters. Grandma wasn't the kind of person who lied. No. But maybe she was the kind of person who protected people. The distinction lingered between us. After 52 years of marriage, I could honestly say Eleanor had never given me a reason to doubt her. She remembered birthdays I'd forgotten, wrote encouragement cards to neighbors recovering from surgery, and somehow knew every child in our church by name before they reached middle school. She was generous without making generosity look important. So why hide 48 Christmas letters? I picked up the oldest envelope. The paper had yellowed with age, but Eleanor's handwriting remained steady. Every December, a different first name appeared beneath the Monroe family surname: Thomas Monroe, Sarah Monroe, Michael Monroe. Then later, Rachel Monroe. Not once did the family name change. Only the generations did. That wasn't an accident. Emily leaned closer. They almost looked like someone passed them down. Before I could answer, I noticed something I'd missed the night before. Tiny numbers written in Eleanor's pencil inside the upper corner of each envelope. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 48. She hadn't simply written Christmas letters. She had intentionally numbered them, as though she always expected the tradition to continue. I reached for Eleanor's old appointment calendar, still resting inside the kitchen drawer where she'd kept it for years. Every December contained the same handwritten reminder. Mail Christmas letter. No name, no explanation. Just those 3 words, repeated year after year without fail. Emily quietly smiled. That means somebody knew. What do you mean? If Grandma remembered every year, someone else probably expected one every year. That simple observation hit harder than I expected. For nearly half a century, somewhere in America, someone may have waited every Christmas for Eleanor's letter. If it never arrived this year, would they think she had forgotten? Or would they somehow know she was gone? By afternoon, I drove to First Community Church, where Eleanor had volunteered since retiring from elementary school teaching. Pastor Daniel Brooks welcomed me with the careful kindness people reserve for recent widowers. "I'm glad you came, Howard. I need to ask you something strange." He smiled gently. "Most worthwhile questions are." I laid the unfinished envelope on his desk. His eyes settled immediately on the handwriting. Eleanor's Christmas letters. The words escaped him so naturally that I barely breathed. "You knew about these?" "I knew she mailed one every Christmas." "You never told me." "I assumed she had." Silence settled between us. Finally, I asked the question that had been haunting me since opening the cedar box. "Who was Rachel Monroe?" Pastor Brooks looked toward the stained glass window before answering. "I don't think Rachel is the person you should be asking about." He folded his hands slowly. "If you're going to understand Eleanor's final letter, You need to learn about Abigail Monroe first. Pastor Brooks didn't continue immediately. Instead, he walked to an old wooden cabinet behind his desk and removed a thick church directory bound with cracked green leather. He placed it between us with the same care Eleanor had always shown when opening family photo albums. I noticed my own hands resting quietly in my lap instead of reaching for it. 30 years maintaining aircraft had taught me that rushing toward incomplete information usually created bigger problems than waiting another minute. I don't want to assume anything, I said. Maybe Rachel Monroe is a distant cousin. Maybe Eleanor volunteered with her. Maybe there's a perfectly ordinary explanation. Pastor Brooks gave a small nod. That's probably why Eleanor trusted you. What do you mean? You look for facts before conclusions. He opened the directory to a page dated 1978. There, among faded church membership photographs, stood a young Eleanor with her choir robe neatly pressed. Beside her smiled another woman about the same age, her dark hair pinned back with a simple white ribbon. That's Abigail Monroe. I stared at the photograph. I've never seen her before. I'm not surprised. The answer bothered me more than it comforted me. 52 years of marriage should have been enough to recognize my wife's closest friends. Shouldn't it? Pastor Brooks gently closed the book. Howard, I'm going to tell you only what I personally know. The rest belongs to Eleanor's story. I appreciated that. Too many people fill missing pieces with imagination. He explained that Abigail had sung beside Eleanor in the church choir for several years before unexpectedly moving away. The two women remained close, even after distance separated them. Every Christmas, Eleanor insisted on mailing one handwritten letter to someone in the Monroe family. Always handwritten? Every single one. No phone calls? Not that I ever knew. No Christmas gifts? Never. Only letters. That somehow made the mystery even larger. Driving home, I kept replaying one detail. If Abigail had simply been an old friend, why had Eleanor never mentioned her? Not once in 5 decades. By the time I reached the house, I had convinced myself of an explanation that felt sensible. Perhaps Abigail and Eleanor had argued years ago. Perhaps the letters were Eleanor's quiet attempt to repair a friendship that never completely healed. It wasn't a perfect answer. But grief has a strange way of accepting imperfect answers because they hurt less than unanswered questions. Emily found me sitting beside the Christmas tree with the unfinished letter resting across my knees. What did the pastor say? He told me about Abigail Monroe. Her eyebrows lifted. So, Rachel's grandmother? I think so. Did he tell you why Grandma kept writing? No. Emily smiled faintly. Then we're still missing the important part. She was right. That evening, I decided not to open any of the older letters. They weren't mine. Whatever Eleanor had written belonged to the people who received them, not to the widower left behind searching for explanations. It would have been easy to satisfy my curiosity by breaking the seals on the copies she had kept, but something inside me refused. Instead, I examined the envelopes themselves. Dates. Postmarks. Paper, ink, patterns. Then one tiny inconsistency finally revealed itself. Every envelope had been addressed in blue fountain pen ink, except the unfinished one. Rachel Monroe's name had been written with Eleanor's black fountain pen, the one she switched to only after developing severe arthritis because its broader grip hurt her hands less. That meant she hadn't prepared the final envelope years in advance. She had written it while she was already growing weaker. I turned the unfinished page over once more. For the first time, I noticed faint indentations pressed into the paper beneath the final unfinished sentence. Not visible words, only impressions. As though Eleanor had started writing another page before quietly removing it. And suddenly I realized the missing page might matter far more than the unfinished one she had intentionally left behind. The missing page occupied my thoughts long after the house had gone quiet. I laid the unfinished letter beneath the warm glow of Eleanor's reading lamp, turning it gently until the faint indentations caught the light. I couldn't read a single word, only shallow impressions left by a pen that had once pressed harder than the paper beneath it. Whoever had removed that second page had done so carefully. My first instinct was to search every drawer in the house until I found it. Instead, I folded the letter back into its envelope. Eleanor deserved better than a frantic husband tearing through the life she'd organized with such quiet care. The next morning, I returned to First Community Church. Pastor Brooks was already arranging poinsettias near the sanctuary when he saw me. I had a feeling you'd be back. I think there's another page. He didn't look surprised. Come with me. Instead of leading me toward the church office, he unlocked a narrow storage room beneath the choir loft. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, filled with decades of Christmas programs, handwritten choir rosters, and carefully labeled archive boxes. Eleanor had volunteered here every December for almost 30 years. She helped organize all of this, he said softly. She never mentioned it. Howard, Eleanor didn't volunteer because she wanted to be noticed. She volunteered because she believed memories disappear unless someone quietly preserves them. We spent nearly an hour searching through Christmas files. I wasn't looking for the missing page anymore. I was looking for Eleanor's footsteps. Then Pastor Brooks reached into an old archive box labeled Choir, Christmas 1982. Inside rested a small velvet pouch. He handed it to me without opening it. You should. Inside was a silver Christmas ornament shaped like a tiny church bell. Its ribbon had faded almost white with age. Engraved across the bottom were 4 words. For Abigail, keep singing. I looked up. Eleanor made this? Pastor Brooks nodded. Actually, Abigail made 2. 2? One for herself, one for Eleanor. The explanation didn't fit. If they were that close, why have I never heard her name? Pastor Brooks sighed. Because Abigail insisted. He finally told me the story. Nearly 50 years earlier, Eleanor had arrived at choir practice devastated after a painful misunderstanding involving members of her own extended family. Rumors had spread through town, and although none were true, Eleanor had become the subject of whispers she never deserved. Most people remained silent. Abigail didn't. She publicly defended Eleanor. She challenged the gossip. She refused to let lies become someone's permanent reputation. The rumors eventually disappeared. But they settled onto Abigail instead. People began treating her differently for standing beside Eleanor. Within a year, Abigail and her husband quietly moved away. I felt something tighten in my chest. So Eleanor believed she owed her. Pastor Brooks shook his head. No. Then why the letters? Because Abigail once told her something neither of them ever forgot. He smiled sadly before repeating the words from memory. Friendship isn't measured by standing beside someone once. It's measured by reminding them they're never standing alone again. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Suddenly, 48 Christmas letters no longer felt mysterious. They felt like gratitude. On my way home, I stopped at the cemetery. Snow had begun falling lightly across Eleanor's headstone. "I think I'm finally seeing what you wanted me to find," I whispered. That evening, Emily arrived carrying hot soup and fresh bread. I showed her the silver ornament. She turned it over carefully before noticing something neither Pastor Brooks nor I had seen. Hidden beneath the faded ribbon was a tiny folded slip of paper. Just one line, written in Eleanor's handwriting. "Rachel keeps Abigail's journal." At that moment, the missing second page stopped being the most important thing in the story. Because somewhere, waiting inside Abigail Monroe's journal, was the answer Eleanor had trusted me to earn instead of simply reading. I left for Maple Creek before sunrise the following morning, with Abigail's name written on a folded piece of paper inside my coat pocket. The town lay barely 40 miles away, yet Eleanor had never once suggested we drive there together during all the years we celebrated Christmas. That realization stayed with me as the highway disappeared beneath a thin blanket of fresh snow. She hadn't hidden the place from me out of distrust. She had simply waited for the right time to send me there. Somehow, I knew that time had finally arrived. Rachel Monroe lived in a white farmhouse beside the town library. The mailbox carried only one name: Monroe. Seeing it made the 48 envelopes suddenly feel real. Someone had actually been opening Eleanor's Christmas letters every December while I decorated our own tree without ever knowing another family quietly depended on those few handwritten pages. I sat in the truck longer than I should have. What if Rachel didn't want to meet me? What if reopening old memories only caused more pain? The unfinished letter remained safely inside my jacket. I had promised myself I wouldn't hand it over until I understood why Eleanor had left it unfinished. Rachel answered the door herself. She looked younger than I expected, perhaps early 40s, with gentle eyes that reminded me of the woman smiling beside Eleanor in the old choir photograph. "Can I help you?" "My name is Howard Ellis." Her expression changed immediately. "Eleanor." The way she whispered my wife's name told me everything. She had been waiting. "I'm her husband." Rachel lowered her eyes before quietly inviting me inside. The living room smelled faintly of pine needles and cinnamon, almost painfully familiar after spending so many Christmases beside Eleanor. Family photographs covered one wall. Several included an elderly woman I immediately recognized as Abigail. Rachel noticed where I was looking. "My grandmother passed away 8 years ago." "I'm sorry. So am I." She disappeared briefly before returning with a weathered wooden box. Without saying a word, she placed it on the coffee table between us. Inside rested 47 carefully folded Christmas letters. Every one preserved, every one tied with the same faded red ribbon. "I've read them all," she said softly. "But only once each Christmas." I struggled to answer. "Eleanor never missed a year." Rachel smiled through watering eyes. "No, she never did." Carefully, she removed the oldest letter and unfolded it. The paper had become fragile with age. My grandmother always told me these letters weren't presents. They were reminders. Reminders of what? That promises can survive people. Those words settled heavily between us. I finally reached into my coat and removed the unfinished envelope. Rachel froze. There wasn't a letter this year. I know. I waited every morning after Thanksgiving. Her voice broke. I kept thinking maybe the mail was just running late. The guilt hit me harder than I expected. Somewhere while Eleanor was dying, another family had quietly been watching their mailbox. Rachel gently touched the unopened envelope but didn't take it. You haven't finished it. No. I don't think I'm supposed to. Instead of disappointment, she nodded. My grandmother said that if Christmas ever came without Eleanor's letter, I shouldn't look for answers inside an envelope. Then where? Rachel stood and walked toward an old glass cabinet near the fireplace. She removed a faded leather journal. Abigail's journal. I've never read the last chapter. You haven't? My grandmother left instructions. Rachel carefully opened the front cover. A single envelope rested inside. Across the front, in Abigail's unmistakably elegant handwriting, were words that made my heartbeat stop. For Howard Ellis. Not Eleanor. Not Rachel. Me. Which meant Abigail had known, decades before either of them died, that one Christmas I would eventually be standing in this very room, searching for the truth they had quietly protected together all those years. Neither Rachel nor I spoke for several seconds. The envelope rested inside Abigail's journal as though it had been patiently waiting for this exact Christmas morning. My name, written in elegant blue ink that had faded with time, seemed impossible. Abigail had died years before Eleanor, yet somehow she had known there would come a day when I, not Rachel, would need to read her final words. Rachel looked at me gently. My grandmother said I wasn't allowed to open it. You never wondered why? Every Christmas. She smiled through quiet tears. But Grandma believed promises lose something when the wrong person keeps them. I carefully broke the brittle seal. The paper inside had yellowed, but Abigail's handwriting remained remarkably steady. Dear Howard, if you are reading this, then Eleanor loved you exactly the way I always hoped she would. That means she trusted you enough to leave one promise unfinished. I stopped. The room suddenly felt very still. Rachel waited without asking me to continue. I read silently for another minute before finally looking up. There isn't a secret. She tilted her head. What do you mean? I've been searching for one. I handed her the letter. There never was. Rachel slowly read the page herself. Abigail explained that almost 50 years earlier, after defending Eleanor against cruel rumors, Eleanor had tried repeatedly to repay the kindness. Abigail refused every offer. Finally, she accepted only one thing. One handwritten Christmas letter every year. Nothing expensive, nothing dramatic, just one reminder that neither woman had been forgotten. Years later, when Abigail realized she was becoming ill, she asked Eleanor to continue writing to whichever member of the Monroe family needed encouragement most. Not because the letters contained extraordinary wisdom, because consistency itself became the gift. Someone remembered. Every Christmas, without fail. Rachel closed the letter against her chest. I always thought Grandma and Eleanor were protecting some enormous secret. They were protecting something. What? The habit. She smiled softly. The promise. For the first time since Eleanor's funeral, I felt my shoulders relax. There had never been another family hidden from me. No hidden child, no buried scandal, no second life. Only two women who quietly believed that remembering someone every Christmas could change an ordinary life. Then Rachel opened Abigail's journal to its final pages. This is the part Grandma told me never to read alone. The last chapter wasn't written by Abigail. It belonged to Eleanor. My wife had written inside the journal only 6 months before she died. The handwriting appeared slower than before, but every word remained unmistakably hers. "Abigail," she began, "my doctors have finally admitted what I've suspected for months. I don't believe I'll see another Christmas after this one. Howard still doesn't know why the letters mattered, and I hope he never learns, because I explained them. I hope he learns because he meets the people they were written for." I had to stop reading. My vision blurred. Rachel quietly continued aloud. "If Howard arrives carrying an unfinished letter, please don't ask him to finish my words. They shouldn't become mine after I'm gone." She turned one more page. "Instead, let him write his own. If he chooses to continue this promise freely, rather than out of obligation, then the tradition truly survives. Love cannot be inherited through instructions. It survives only through willing hearts." Neither of us moved. Suddenly, the unfinished letter inside my jacket felt different. Eleanor hadn't failed to complete it. She had deliberately refused to decide what came next. She had left the final Christmas message unwritten because she believed it belonged to me, not her. Rachel gently reached across the coffee table and placed a fountain pen beside the unfinished page. "I think," she whispered, "she's been waiting for you to write the next sentence." I looked at the blank space where Eleanor's handwriting ended. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I was afraid of writing something unworthy of the woman who had trusted me enough to leave it blank. Rachel quietly excused herself and left me alone beside the fireplace. The old farmhouse settled into the peaceful silence only country homes seem able to hold. A grandfather clock ticked steadily across the room, while snow drifted beyond the front window, softening fences, trees, and the distant church steeple, until everything looked as though Christmas itself had wrapped the world in white. The unfinished letter lay before me. Eleanor's final sentence still stopped in the same place. "If you're reading this, then another Christmas has arrived, and there is something your grandmother wanted you to know before." Nothing. Only empty paper. For nearly an hour, I held the fountain pen without writing a single word. Aircraft maintenance had taught me that when you weren't absolutely certain, you waited. You checked. You measured. You verified. Paper didn't work that way. Eventually, I realized I wasn't trying to finish Eleanor's sentence anymore. I was trying to protect it. Then I remembered something she used to tell our grandchildren whenever they struggled writing thank you cards. People don't remember perfect words. They remember honest ones. I smiled before tears blurred the page. Even now, she was still helping me. I placed the pen against the paper. Instead of pretending to speak for Eleanor, I began exactly where Abigail had hoped I would. "Rachel, my name is Howard Ellis." The words came slowly at first. "I cannot finish the sentence Eleanor began because those were her words. But I can tell you what I learned by following them. As the ink flowed across the page, something unexpected happened. I stopped feeling like a widower writing after a funeral. I felt like a husband continuing a conversation. I wrote about discovering the cedar box, about finding 48 envelopes, about Abigail's courage, about a promise that had quietly survived through ordinary Christmas mornings instead of dramatic moments anyone else would ever celebrate. Finally, I wrote the only sentence that truly mattered. Eleanor wanted you to know that no one who is remembered with love is ever forgotten by time. When I signed my own name beneath hers, I understood why she had left the page unfinished. Not because she couldn't complete it, because love had reached the place where only another heart could carry it forward. Rachel returned carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. She didn't immediately ask to read the letter. Instead, she noticed something else. "You signed your own name." I almost signed Eleanor's. "What changed your mind?" I looked toward the window where snow continued falling. "She spent 52 years teaching me honesty." It seemed like a poor time to stop. Rachel laughed softly through tears. "I think Grandma would have liked that answer." She carefully read the finished letter from beginning to end. When she reached the final paragraph, she covered her mouth. "My grandmother always wondered who would write after Eleanor. I don't know if anyone should." Rachel closed the pages gently. "I think you're wrong." Before I could answer, she stood and walked toward the same wooden box containing all 47 Christmas letters. She untied the faded ribbon. Then, without hesitation, she placed my completed letter beside the others. 48 became 49. The tradition had quietly crossed into another life. That afternoon, before leaving Maple Creek, Rachel handed me Abigail's journal. "You should keep this." "I can't. My grandmother disagreed." Inside the back cover, another note waited, this one written by Abigail years before her death. When Howard finally understands why the letters mattered, the journal belongs with him until he finds someone else who needs the story more than he does. Driving home through the falling snow, I kept the journal on the passenger seat beside Eleanor's unfinished envelope. Except it wasn't unfinished anymore. Not really. The letter had simply become something larger than either of us. By the time I reached our driveway, Emily's car was already waiting. She met me at the front porch before I even shut off the engine. "You finished it." I nodded. "But that's not the remarkable part." "What is?" I handed her Abigail's journal. "I think your grandmother may have spent 50 years preparing someone else besides me." Emily looked confused, until a folded sheet of paper slipped quietly from the back cover. Across the front, in Eleanor's familiar handwriting, were 6 simple words. "For Emily, next Christmas." Christmas morning arrived wrapped in the quiet kind of sunlight Eleanor always loved. Golden light spilled across the dining room table where the cedar box rested in the center, surrounded by 49 carefully preserved Christmas letters. For the first time since her funeral, I opened every curtain in the house without feeling guilty for letting happiness back inside. The house no longer felt empty. It felt entrusted. Emily arrived just after 9 with her husband and our 2 great-grandchildren. Their laughter rushed through the front door long before they did, filling every room Eleanor had once filled with music, baking, and impossible amounts of Christmas decorations. Life, I realized, had quietly returned. After breakfast, Emily looked toward me. "I think it's time." I nodded. She unfolded the note Eleanor had addressed only to her. No one spoke. Even the children became unusually still, as though they somehow understood that Grandma still had one more story to tell. Emily began reading. My sweet Emily, if your grandfather is sitting beside you while you read this, then Christmas has already given me more than I ever dreamed possible. Howard has always believed that love is proven during life's biggest moments. I used to believe that too, but after spending more than 50 years loving him, I've discovered something much quieter. Love survives because ordinary people choose ordinary kindness over and over again, until one day, those ordinary choices become someone else's greatest blessing. Every Christmas letter I ever mailed carried only one purpose: to make sure one family never questioned whether they had been forgotten. If our family decides to continue this tradition, I hope it brings joy. If it ends with me, I hope that brings peace. Because love should never become an obligation. It should always remain a gift freely given. Emily lowered the letter, unable to continue for several moments. Tears filled every eye around the table. Not because Eleanor had left us instructions, because she had left us freedom. Without saying a word, Emily reached into the cedar box and placed a fresh sheet of cream-colored stationery beside the 49 letters. Then she laid Eleanor's black fountain pen on top. No announcement. No expectation. Only an invitation waiting for whichever heart might someday answer it. Just then, my 7-year-old great-granddaughter Lily wandered over holding a paper snowflake she had proudly cut out that morning. Can Grandma have this? Emily looked at me. I smiled. I think she'd treasure it. Lily carefully tucked the paper snowflake into the cedar box. It rested beside 49 handwritten letters, looking almost impossibly small. Yet somehow, it belonged there. Because kindness is never measured by size, only by love. That afternoon, after everyone had gone home, I carried the cedar box onto the front porch. Fresh snow drifted across the yard while church bells echoed softly through the neighborhood. For a long while, I simply sat there thinking about Eleanor. Then I whispered the words she had probably been waiting years to hear. You were right. I had spent months believing grief meant learning how to live without the person you loved. Eleanor had quietly shown me something entirely different. Grief is learning how to keep loving after they're gone. That evening, I walked to our mailbox one last time. Inside rested a single envelope, no return address, only my name. Howard Ellis. I immediately recognized Rachel's handwriting. Inside was a simple Christmas card. Howard, this was the first Christmas without Eleanor's handwriting. But it was also the first Christmas when I realized her promise never depended on one person. It depended on one heart choosing another. Thank you for reminding us that love never truly ends. It simply finds new hands willing to carry it forward. Merry Christmas. With gratitude, Rachel. Tucked inside the card was a photograph. The cedar box, 49 letters. Abigail's journal. Lily's paper snowflake, and one blank sheet of stationery resting patiently at the very end. Waiting. Not demanding. Simply waiting. I smiled. Perhaps someone would write next Christmas. Perhaps they wouldn't. Either way, Eleanor's promise had already done exactly what she hoped it would do. It had reminded another family that they were never forgotten. And maybe that's the greatest legacy any of us can leave behind. Not wealth, not recognition, not perfect memories, just the quiet certainty that somewhere, someone still remembers us with love. If this story touched your heart today, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, who is someone you'll always remember every Christmas, and why? Your story may become the reminder someone else needs this holiday season. And if stories about family, dignity, quiet courage, and the enduring power of love mean something to you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Quiet Valor Stories, and join us again for another unforgettable journey. From my family to yours, may your Christmas be filled with peace, hope, kindness, and the comfort of knowing that those we love never truly leave us while we continue to carry